welcome to this video where we are going to talk about optimism and pessimism and how it relates to philosophy, and in particular two philosophers who I think are on polar opposites when it comes to optimism and pessimism. And so hopefully you'll enjoy this. Be sure to comment and let me know what you think. Okay, so do you consider yourself an optimist or a pessimist? And it might have to do with which philosophers you tend to gravitate towards. And, you know, when you wake up in the morning and you see a scene like this, do you generally say, wow, it's a new day, I'm excited to be alive, there's the sunrise? Or do you say, oh, another day, gosh, it's drudgery. You may go so far as to say, I just want to go back to bed. I don't even know if I want to be alive. Okay, so that's what this is about, optimism and pessimism. And we're going to be comparing the philosophy of the man who this entire, page is dedicated to, St. Thomas Aquinas. He is a 13th century Catholic priest and, Dominican priest. And I would say extremely optimistic in his philosophy and his outlook in the world. And I'm going to compare that to Arthur Schopenhauer, German philosopher of the 19th century, hugely influenced Nietzsche and others as well. Most would say he's the philosopher of pessimism, and I'll give you some quotes and you'll probably come to that conclusion by the end of this video as well. All right, so you look out in the world, you see nature, you see birds, you see beavers. What do you see when you view things like this? Do you see God's hand at work? Do you see creatures acting for an end? Do you just see, miserable, horrible things that might get eaten? A bird might get eaten by a snake and a beaver's going to kill a fish. The way you see these kind of things really tells you a lot about yourself and, like I said, the philosophers that have influenced you. So here's St. Thomas Aquinas in relation to the created world out there that we come across every single day. He asks in the Summa, are the perfections of all things in God? And he says all created perfections are in God. Hence he is spoken of as universally perfect, because he lacks not any excellence which may be found in any genus. First, because whatever perfection exists in an effect must be found in the effective cause. Since therefore God is the first effective cause of all things, the perfections of all things must pre-exist in God in a more eminent way. Okay, so right away Aquinas is saying we see good stuff out there. Okay, we see flowers and trees and birds and clouds, things that are beautiful, the puppies and cats. And Thomas is saying, okay, connect it to God, because the perfection that you witness in these things exists in a more preeminent way in God. Okay, so you can see the relationship between creature and creator comes out very strongly in St. Thomas Aquinas. What about Schopenhauer? Okay, Arthur Schopenhauer says, and to this world, to this scene of tormented and agonizing beings who only continue to exist by devouring each other, in which, therefore, every ravenous beast is the living grave of thousands of others, and its self-maintenance is a chain of painful deaths, and in which the capacity for feeling pain increases with knowledge and therefore reaches its highest degree in man, a degree which is the higher the more intelligent the man is. To this world it has been sought to apply the system of optimism and demonstrate to us that it is the best of all possible worlds. The absurdity is glaring. So when Schopenhauer sees a bird eating a worm or a snake eating a frog, it destroys him. I mean, you and I can speak for myself. I've eaten many chickens and I eat pork and I've had certainly beef. So all he sees me is somebody who has survived on the death of other creatures. Okay, that's what he's getting at here, okay? But Aquinas doesn't see it that way. He sees the world as good and as a reflection of a good God. All right, so we move on. G.K. Chesterton, in his book The Dumb Ox about St. Thomas Aquinas, said, to him, St. Thomas Aquinas, even the momentary was momentous. And what he means by this is that Thomas lived in the moment, and he was filled with awe and wonder, and he enjoyed life. He saw beauty, right? But not so much for Arthur Schopenhauer. his philosophy, one person described it as stunningly and famously pessimistic. And if you look at his story, you might see the reasons perhaps why he ended up this way. His father committed suicide when he was very young. He had a horrible relationship with his mother. He was estranged from her for the last 20 or 30 years of his life. His mother said young Arthur brooded on the misery of things. So he wasn't a happy child, and he certainly wasn't a happy adult. You also have to understand that when he was about 14 years old, the Napoleonic Wars broke out and lasted for 16 years. 2.5 to 3.5 million people died across Europe, and so it was a tough time. It was a sad time. It was a tragic time, and he grew up in this time, and many people are very pessimistic. So we got to be aware of, what is the zeitgeist of our age? What's influencing what we are thinking and feeling, and the philosophizing in the case of Schopenhauer. His most famous book is The World as Will and Representation. It was published in 1818. And again, right after the Napoleonic Wars, he said the world is will to the extent that all ideas are a manifestation of the will. The will is not an idea or a representation, but a thing in itself. The will is the underlying reality of the world, with the aim that all phenomena depends on it. And interestingly, he borrowed from Eastern religion, mysticism, and said that really the goal was to extinguish the will. I'll get a little bit more into that here in a moment, okay? So what does Thomas Aquinas think about the will? Whereas Schopenhauer thought it was something that had to be extinguished, Thomas says the will is a rational appetite. Every appetite is only of something good. The reason of this is that the appetite is nothing else than an inclination of a person desirous of a thing towards that thing. Now, every inclination is to something like and suitable to the thing inclined. Schopenhauer would not agree with this. Okay, since therefore everything, inasmuch as it is being in substance, is a good, it must be that every inclination is to something good, and hence it is that Aristotle, the philosopher, says that the good is that which all desire. Okay, so again, optimism. Thomas sees everything that we desire. I mean, even if I wanted to go next door and steal my neighbor's TV, Thomas would say, well, that's because you see it as good. You're not stealing it because it's bad. You're stealing it because it's good, right? So you see the optimism here. Whereas Schopenhauer says, it is really incredible how meaningless and insignificant when seen from without, and how dull and senseless when from within, is the course of life of the great majority of men. It is weary longing and worrying, a dreamlike staggering through the four ages of life to death, accompanied by a series of trivial thoughts. They are like clockwork that is wound up and goes without knowing why. Every time a man is begotten and born, the clock of human life is wound up anew to repeat once more its same old tune that has already been played innumerable times, movement by movement and measure by measure, which, with insignificant variations, every individual, every human apparition, and its course of life is only one more short dream of an endless spirit of nature, of the persistent will to live. Okay, so again, he didn't see the value in life. He was not a believer. He didn't see how things were connected to God. It's the kind of thing where you just wish you could have a coffee with this guy and explain God to him so that he would not be so darn pessimistic. All right, Aquinas, on the other hand, he says goodness and being are basically like the same thing. If something has being, if something exists, it's good. And every being is good, all right, because every creature of God is good. And so Thomas looks out at this entire world and says, it's all good. And we're drawn to the good. We desire the good, whether it's for our sensitive appetite or our intellectual appetite. We want what is good. Not so much Schopenhauer. Get a load of this. He says, if now we contemplate the turmoil of life, we behold all occupied with its want and misery, straining all their powers to satisfy its infinite needs and to ward off its multifarious sorrows, yet without daring to hope for anything else than simply the preservation of this tormented existence for a short span of time. Okay, not good. He says, in between, however, and in the midst of this tumult, we see the glance of two lovers meeting longingly, yet why so secretly, fearfully, and stealthily? Because these lovers are the traitors who seek to perpetuate the whole want and drudgery which would otherwise speedily reach an end. Here lies the profound reason for the shame connected with the process of generation. Okay, so he's saying people feel shame in sexuality and their romance and all that, and this is why, because it's just perpetuating the misery of human existence. So he would say this guy is miserable and his life is drudgery and there's really no point. And then all of a sudden comes along a pretty girl and everything changes, and this guy is attracted to her, and then Schopenhauer says he's a traitor because the next thing you know, he gets married, and there's romance, and there's guys and girls attracted to each other, and of course, what's going to result from this is going to be, well, you can guess. So Schopenhauer says, the less we have to do with women, then the better. They are not even a necessary evil. Life is safer and smoother without them. Let men recognize the snare that lies in women's beauty, and the absurd comedy of reproduction will end. The development of intelligence will weaken or frustrate the will to reproduce, and will thereby at last achieve the extinction of the race. This is his goal, the extinction of the race, because he sees that, oh, and by the way, have a nice day, says Arthur Schopenhauer. What he's saying is that, these guys being attracted to women and getting married and reproducing, what is the result of that going to be is, of course, babies. And we see this trend in our culture today where there's a real anti-life, and, people think the world's overpopulated and, got to, help the climate, rather than keep having babies and carbon footprint and that kind of stuff. This comes from Schopenhauer. This is his philosophy, that we need to have like a corporate suicide and just decide we're not going to reproduce anymore, and that will solve all of our problems. Okay, so what does Aquinas have to say about this? Aquinas says natural reason inclines thereto in two ways. He's talking about marriage here. First, in relation to the principal end of matrimony, namely the good of the offspring. Okay, for nature intends not only the begetting of offspring, but also its education and development until it reaches the perfect state of man as man, and that is the state of virtue. Now, a child cannot be brought up and instructed unless it has certain and definite parents, and this would not be the case unless there were a tie between the man and the definite woman, and it is in this that matrimony consists. Secondarily, says Aquinas, in relation to the secondary end of matrimony, which is the mutual services which married persons render one to the other in the household matters, for just as natural reason dictates that men should live together, since one is not self-sufficient in all things concerning life, for which reason a man is described as being naturally inclined to political society, so too among those works that are necessary for human life, some are becoming to men and others to women. Wherefore, nature inculcates that society of men and women which consists in matrimony. So he sees a complementarity of men and women. He sees that when men and women come together, they reproduce and they create babies. And this is a good thing, okay? A child, a creature made to the image and likeness of God. So I hope this helps. And, the world is good, and families are good, and kittens and sunrises. There's beauty out there. And we have to be careful what influences we have, because Schopenhauer has had a huge influence on our culture. But thankfully, so has Aquinas. And this is the battle going on today. The battle between pessimism and optimism. The battle, really, when it comes down to it, is how are we going to see the world around us? Aquinas says the ultimate beatitude of man consists in the use of his highest function, which is the operation of his intellect. For there resides in every man a natural desire to know the cause of any effect which he sees. A kitten, a sunrise, a baby, a rose, okay? And thence arises wonder in men. But if the intellect of the rational creature could not reach so far as to the first cause of things, that natural desire would remain void. Thomas sees everything through the eyes of God. All of creation is good. Why? Because God is good, and that goodness preexists in God. The perfection preexists in God, and all the world is a representation and a participation in the goodness of God. Schopenhauer didn't see it this way. Schopenhauer thinks we all just quit reproducing, quit creating these dastardly babies, and then we can all just kind of perish. I hope you can see that between optimism and pessimism, between Schopenhauer and Aquinas, there's really only one choice. The choice is life, the choice is goodness, and the choice is the optimistic philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas. Thank you for watching. God bless you.